Here is the Crescendo Music Education Podcast, episode 115. This podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Turrbal people. I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. They were the first music makers on this land. Thank you for tuning into the Crescendo Music Education Podcast. I am Debbie O'Shea, and in this episode I am joined again by Joe Twist. If you missed the previous episode, go back and have a listen to that first. In that episode, I read out his brief bio, and it will give you a little bit more background to get ready to fully enjoy this episode. I tell you what, there are some mic drop moments in this episode. There are times when you're listening to this that I'm sure you will go, "Oh, yes, Joe, you are so right." I love speaking to people and hearing from people that help me to look at things from a slightly different perspective, give me a new understanding. I loved being able to chat to someone who is not as completely immersed in music education as I am. So without further ado, I am going to let you listen to this episode with the insightful, creative, wonderful Joe Twist. One of my questions was, like how much of your, because I don't speak to many people who work full-time as a composer. You know, most composers in Australia work and then they work on as a composer as a passion project. You know, Annie Kwok and people like that, they have other jobs. So when I'm talking to a full-time composer and a successful, well-known one like you, I'd be interested to know how much is slog and how much is glory. Because, you know, reality, we know the glory bits, that's not what it's like all the time.
Not at all.
So
it's all slog, really.
it's all slog.
No, well, look, most of it is, let's face it. I guess what I want to say is that I feel like I do kind of have a day job, although it's kind of a weird one that kind of comes and goes. I mean, yeah, I am full-time composing. I'm not teaching or anything at the moment. I really think the fact that I do different things, I've got a TV show I work on and I get commissions, is the only reason why I'm able to, pay the bills. I feel like if I didn't have the TV and the film element, which I worked really hard, particularly through my 30s, I went to America and lived over there for years. If I hadn't sort of nurtured that, I'd probably just be doing column music, but I'd probably have to have another job. And by the way, watch this space. I mean, I'm always waiting for this point where kind of the luck dries up when it comes to, big grand commissions like Watershed or TV shows like Bluey that I get to work on and just, work that keeps coming in. One day it'll all dry up and I'm either knocking on a private school door or getting a dip ed or going to a university. Like that, just to be, frank with your audience, like that's kind of where it's quite likely to go at some point. But 42 now, and I've, for 20 years odd, along with being a student at different times, I've able to just sustain doing all this kind of work. I mean, and also along with a lot of arrangements. You've probably seen that, like I did arrangements for Moby, and which isn't like, it's not really composing work. I mean, I still put this as parts of a hat on. We often talk about putting different hats on as musicians, yes. And when you're eclectic too, I put my film music hat on. I put on my mixing engineering hat on, but then I put on my choral hat on with voice types, and then I put my piano hat on for writing. How do I write a nice piano part? So all these different things at the same time. So I'm just lucky that, between the arranging and also many years I've sung in churches, that's like a little bit of, paying bills money. I had a lovely job at a fabulous Episcopal church in America where I sang full-time as a staff singer in a church. So, it's not like I've I've always been full-time, or it's been close to it for quite a while. Now it is that way. But it is a lot of slog. I have to get an accountant, and doing taxes as a sole trader is tricky, as I'm sure it is for tradies. It's sort of similar. It's just that I don't sort of go out and fix toilets, 3 or 4 or 5 a day. I'll get a lump sum for like something I did a month ago or 2 months ago. And then that's like, I live on that and what have you. Royalties help, I must admit. And that's probably where film music kind of helps with that as well. So yeah, I mean, look, I'm giving you a lot of like nuts and bolts here, but maybe that will, I kind of want to take off the sheen of the idea that I'm, I wake up every day with a quill and pour a big pot of coffee and write a grand symphony, at my board over here. So yeah, in the end, it's still real life. And you have to do these things. And look, we'll see. Maybe I'll get lucky and just keep getting lots and lots of TV work and be able to keep this going. But I wouldn't be surprised if, eventually I'll be teaching, which I miss though. I miss teaching. I love it.
Yeah, because teaching also informs composition.
It does. That's right.
So there's that positive side. I mean, I would like to say, except that I've worked in music education, and so on the edge of other forms of music in Australia for quite a long time now. And I know it's a tough gig to make a living as a composer. I think Australia might be particularly difficult. Maybe it's everywhere. So I'd love to say I'm sure it will continue, but I imagine it's quite a scary thing. Well, let's hope, yes, it continues. But it must be a scary thing. It's something sometimes we take for granted as teachers, as much as our job gets sometimes very demanding and difficult. My paycheck is in my bank every 2 weeks. Right. And I tell you what, I'd never take that for granted.
There you go. And they take the tax out so that at the end of sorry, getting really technical, but when it comes to tax time, you don't get the big thing. Like I've got huge bills from the tax department because I've got to pay it myself. But it's just a sole trading thing. That's right. That's like really specific detailed thing. But I thank the lucky stars every day that I've managed to keep it going. I'm not sitting here, with bated breath waiting for it to dry up. I just think I'm lucky that it looks like I'm good for a while, but anything can happen. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
Excellent. Can I ask a little about Bluey? Even though I know that you said you've not done most of the episodes, but one of the things that my audience loves about Bluey is the way that art music, classical music, is incorporated, and these little snippets that occur are just a really powerful way to introduce kids to this music. Can you tell us a little about why and how? And I mean, I just know we appreciate it and actually use it in our classrooms to just play little snippets and bring it out and say, oh, and here it is played by an orchestra or whatever. So how did it come about? Do you know, or what's the story with the bits of?
Well, it's a joint effort, I'm pretty sure. I get a lot of this through Joff, who really is my boss in a sense in this thing. Joff is the main composer of the show, but also the boss is other directors like Joe Brum, Charlie Aspinwall as well, and Dali Pearson. I think they always had, and whether it was Joff who probably encouraged them early on, I think there's always been a vision to doing that. I think for several reasons. One, just to sort of the educational element of introducing, of young people to classical music and what's out there, just having those tunes available. And two, I think there's a sense that good classical music, I mean, we try and create something like this too, but good classical music is really catchy. The music that echoes through the ages in a way is an earworm, can be, not all of it, but a lot of it can be earworms. And that's usually the stuff that ends up in, that we remember. So the trick really is, I think, in that show is to turn that into part of the game. I mean, really, the music is sort of reflecting what the game is. There's obviously often lessons to learn and characters who learn different things throughout the show. But really, in the end, it's the joy of childhood, and it's the fun of learning through games. Like nearly every episode is really just a game. Let's face it. So I think that's kind of the overall philosophy with it. The example I'd refer to that I've done in particular is Seesaw, an episode called Seesaw. So they're playing, I don't know if you've seen it, but Bluey and Bingo and all their friends are playing on the seesaw. But Bandit, Dad, comes over and sits on one end. And so they can't play anymore because he's too heavy, So it's this really simple thing of introducing, I mean, this is the idea, isn't it? Introducing kids to heavy and sort of a simple, light and heavy contrast. And so what the music is that we use is from Handel. It's a little more obscure than say, the Sleepy Time, which uses Holst, the planets, that kind of thing. It's much more emotional. This is more of a game, I guess, in this one. So I guess it served different purposes. But the tune is Handel, and it is from Let Rolling Streams. There's a vocal part, but the main thing is this motive. Bum, bum, ba, 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 bum, 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 ba, 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 bum, the octaves that happen. And I think that Joe Brum actually had the idea for that. Maybe it was Joff, I'm not sure. I was brought on to work on them with it, the music, and wrote a whole bunch of it. But yeah, it's that's a really clear example, just the octave seesaw and then high and low. It's just this idea of contrast in that episode. It's a game we're playing seesaw, which we're trying to make it so the heavy one, Bandit, ends up like that. So it's the power of all the kids to get up onto the seesaw, and there's a little Pomeranian who comes at the last minute. What's her name? Pom Pom comes, and she's a small and hardy breed, a Pomeranian, and it tips the seesaw over. So yeah, I mean, I think that gives you an idea into one episode and the philosophy behind that. There's another episode, by the way, called Calypso that I wrote. It was an interesting one because they often use a thing called a temp track, and they were thinking of using the I think it's actually a hymn originally, but Sasson uses this melody in his third symphony, the organ symphony. Da, 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 da. No, that's mine. Da, 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 da. And there's, we often do it, but Joff will say to me, oh, well, if you write something similar and different, then you can always do that. It doesn't have to be the Sasson, So sometimes we want to actually quote the classical music like we did with the Handel. We will write a kind of pastiche on the piece, and I just sort of moved a few notes around and made my own theme, but it had this sort of flavor. I think actually what they did is they used a bunch of music from the movie Babe, which Nigel Westlake scored, using that Sasson melody. But I wrote something different again. But there's still, again, a connection to classical music there. And it's just, I think in that episode, it's really just the joy of different people in different parts of your class. Calypso is a teacher, by the way, and one character is doing this. They're building a little house, and the terriers have made a fort with a bunch of sofa cushions and things like that. So they get this sort of variation on the simple theme that's got brass and percussion, that kind of thing. And it's just exploring fun things to do in class. Like it starts at school, and the episode finishes at school. And one of the characters makes this great big village for the gnomes, little toy gnomes they have. So they create a great big kind of world on a mat with little tiny figurines and stuff like that. So yeah, and music helps to create that sort of wonder and magic. I mean, the music grows and grows, but it uses the same melody throughout that episode. Yeah, I mean, some of this, again, is one of those things where you do it intuitively, but when you think about it later, you realize what kind of the idea was. Does that help in a way?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Right.
It's fascinating. I love it. I love it, Joe. Thank you. I know everybody who's listening is going, this is fascinating. Oh, like it,
Cool.
you're giving us a little glimpse into the other side of a world that we see the nice polished product. Not that I've actually really ever seen a Bluey. Sorry, that's only because of, I don't have. I'm sorry. It's just I don't have little children. I'll catch up on them all if I ever get. I've seen snippets, so I can
You're
say
too
I'm
busy teaching them. You haven't got time to watch their
Oh,
their
exactly.
TV. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. No, I
Yeah,
think it's absolutely fascinating to give us this
great.
little insight. Now, I do normally ask my guests for nuggets of fabulous. I don't know if you've got any tips, tricks, ideas when you go and work with choirs and when you do musicianship, or even tips and tricks for people who want to start writing music. I don't know.
Mm.
Whatever you want, are there any nuggets of fabulous you'd like to share with my audience?
Yeah, see, because I don't actually teach, and I mean I have, but I haven't done much of it. I've sort of done bits with Sydney Children's Choir years ago, and then I kind of go to a rehearsal here and there. I'm not. Sometimes I find I spend so long in front of my computer writing, and then when I'm like in front of musicians, whether they're children or not, I'm like, oh, how do I do this again? I'm used to just getting it all right in on the computer. So I don't think I'd have like a whole bunch of educational nuggets for the educators out there, but I can definitely speak to composers, I think.
Excellent.
And I would just say um I I would just say to remember that yeah, this is my nugget. I would say that composing is just improvising very, very slowly. And if that inspires people, like extremely slowly, if that inspires people from an inspiration point of view, I mean, I guess there's a sense where um, one issue that can happen with teaching is not really an issue, but just one element of teaching music is we teach the music as it is, and we learn the things of the music and the notes and how it works. And then we like to teach to work on improvising, right? Because it brings another level to it. It encourages creativity. But the next step, really, in my opinion, is just composing. And it's kind of going back to the nuts and bolts of it in a sense. You've got to go, okay, well, hang on, if I'm going to write this down, then what time signature are we in? And, what key signature, et cetera, et cetera. If necessary, maybe you might just play with sound. And remember that, like, sometimes you could start a piece by just throwing something into a piano if you want to be really arty. But I digress. So if that helps people connect the idea of composing and to not be scared of it, it goes to what we were talking about earlier too. But if you can not be scared of composing as this sort of grand thing, and it really is just a kind of extension of improvising, if that helps, then I hope that I've made a difference and encourage people to write more. And maybe even that helps to link things together. I know it's just one nugget and it's just a very grand kind of macro level one. But I'd like to think it helps because it's something I've realized in thinking about what I do a lot. And yeah, it's like you can, in a sense, I actually think when I started as a musician as a kid, the first thing you actually do is improvise. I mean, you imitate, I guess. And is there a connection between imitating and improvising? I guess there is. You imitate, you do the same thing, you do it differently, or you make a mistake or whatever. And then you do it in your own way and you find your own things. And then you slowly learn like exactly how to play that piece of Bach. And then you learn your Bach chorales and your secondary dominants and all the things and blah, blah. I mean, that's more university, I guess, but or high school, but, it's still a thing. Or you learn the C major scale, or you learn pentatonic modes, that kind of thing. So it's just, yeah, in a sense, it's, in my opinion, there's a connection between the learning and the improvising and then the composing. It's really it's like a photo, a piece. It's a snapshot of how someone improvised something that they think kind of works like that. And maybe maybe you can think of it as like opening it up on a computer and photoshopping it, that photo. When you change it, when you edit it and realize, you know what, this doesn't work for this group. It needs to go down a tone, and the high bit that could be a D, not an F sharp. It could just be the tonic rather than the third. All those kind of little things, and that's fine. And it's still just this connection. I don't think we need to have too much of a regimented boxed in relationship with learning a piece improvising music and writing music. To me, they're all interconnected. Yeah. If
Yeah.
that helps,
Oh,
great.
I definitely think that's a nugget. And that quote at the beginning that you said, improv, improvisation, help me. What did you say?
Is composing very slowly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Improvisation. Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, composing
No,
is improvising very
yeah,
slowly.
I knew
Yeah.
I had that wrong. Yes.
No,
Composing
you're right.
is improvising very slowly. I
Yeah.
think that's fabulous. Thank you.
Cool.
Oh,
Sure.
now, we do have a little problem with preserving music in our schools at the moment and convincing people that music's really important. You know, music
Yeah.
education is really important. We need to
Yes.
start with the kids, you know, whether people are working with the kids or not, but professional musicians need kids to have music in schools. You know, we need it. Do you have any advice? I just like to pick everyone's brain on this. Any advice around advocacy, how we can help convince people that every kid should have music?
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? Because I know there are so many people who dedicate a lot of time for this, who are, you know, proper educators, and I'm not one of them. And I would just defer and agree with them. But if I can offer my own experience to that, it's a little bit like the last one, believe it or not. Is that what I want to say is that music is everywhere, and the style of music as well is also universal. Like, styles of music feed from one to another. You know, I'm gonna echo and reshare and retweet or whatever, or anything where people says, you know, music should be taught as an immersive experience. I'm sure Jason Goopy, shout out to Jason Goopy, does a lot of this kind of stuff in particular. I went to UQ with him, he's fabulous. And I believe in that, you know, the same way we do like language immersion, music immersion makes so much sense. The way the Hungarians did it, like, you know, absolutely all of that. But I think one problem might be is that I think people don't look at music theater or a pop song or a film score, and they don't see the connection to music education. It's just sort of this other world thing. So I'm sort of giving you, because I'm, you know, sort of working in the practitioner world and what have you. And when I think about writing a pop song, like sometimes I've got to write, I had to write an 80s montage, Eye of the Tiger kind of thing for The Strange Chores recently, right? And it has a sus chord in it, and it's got a secondary a kind of secondary dominant thing. It's got a sort of Mixolydian mode thing going on, but it's still just very simple pop. So just, I think it's got the same sort of bump 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 kind of beat going on, and like you can break that down and connect it to any Bach or even pentatonic mode. You could break it down to folk music. Like I think people sometimes fail to realize that when you're teaching the rudiments of music and the structures of music as this wonderful thing that opens up and provides a springboard for creativity, there's an assumption that it just leads to a person in a classical music hall behind a piano or a violin, and that's kind of it. Not at all. It leads to Tim Minchin. It leads to Kylie Minogue. It leads to Lachlan Skipworth. It leads to Debbie O'Shea. It leads to Paul Jarman. You know, like, and Paul would echo the same stuff, and he's a perfect example. I mean, when you go to Festival of Voices and he does those nights where you're playing songs, he's on the piano, that kind of thing. I actually didn't get to go with it because I was sick, but I've heard so much about it. I'm sure it's amazing. But yeah, there's like, it's, to me, it's just all connected. And what's fun about music is that you learn one thing, or you learn how to do a certain technique, and then you hear it, if you really listen, in a pop song, and then you hear it in a piece by Beethoven, and you go, oh, it's the same thing. And I just, and to me, if we're teaching music that way, and I say this is not an educator much, but I feel like, if I dare say, if we teach them that way, I think we inspire more and we encourage more, and we don't give the impression that there's just like, you know, a stuffy concert hall with, you know, people who are generally in their later years, you know, listening to dead white male composers most of the time. You know, it's Whitney Houston that has secondary dominance and modulation that totally come out of any classical piece of music. So, by the way, I should also add, though, that that's a very classical centric way. We really should also look at Indian Carnatic music and Greek music and Chinese music and music from all over the world and connect that as well. Yeah, it's there's so much to be inspired by, that we should love the magic and love all the connections. That's my suggestion.
I think that would be great if we could do that. And if we
it's all very, how do we do that, Joe? I don't have the answer for that.
But if we could move a little more towards that, then that would generate out, and that would provide its own momentum if we all were moving towards that.
Well, I think so. And I mean, I think there's, I mean, I spent many years at UQ, and I went through University of Queensland, where it was very, the traditional music, classical degree that starts at the Baroque and it goes through to now, sort of, and then you learn that classical thing. But I loved finding how other music connected. Like I said, the sort of connection between Whitney Houston and the Bach chorale, I think there is. But that's a very traditional classical way of learning, and there's so much more, so much music I've left out. It's that battle, isn't it, between, this is to talk about education generally, and it's just a thought I've had, the battle between teaching how to learn and teaching something. And I don't have the answer to that, but I just present that as something that I'm sure educators and people who are watching who are much bigger experts in it than I am, that's something I think we need to deal with in some way, because, you know, 20, 30, 40 years time, we've got a whole another 30 years of music that now exists. And there's still so much before. Like, we don't really need to be writing new music. I mean, we do actually.
Sorry, we've got to keep Joe in a job. Come on.
That's true. What I mean to say is we're not well, actually, I mean, if you look at like repertoire for things like tuba, there's not enough of it. But there's enough there's a lot of music. Okay, I shouldn't say there's enough. There's a lot of music, and you can't ever know all of it, right? But we need to find a way to encourage learning that allows a kind of the macro and the micro. I suppose that's kind of what, the nugget of what I'm trying to say. And I don't know how that's done, because I think it would be great to have young adults and then people in university, and when they graduate from university, you know a certain amount of things, because they should, I guess, but know it in a way that empowers them to keep learning more. And I don't know how you do that.
No, I don't know how you would actually do it,
well,
but I
maybe
would
you
say,
do it through competition. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe everything I'm talking about is the idea. Maybe that's what composing is, that you look backwards while you look to the future. I don't know. That's just a thought off the top of my head.
Oh, that was very deep. But I think you've got it though. I mean, there are building blocks that you need. I mean, I do not want I don't want to be the educator that has an illiterate person that can just tap a few keys and put things into a digital audio workstation and go, I understand music. Look, I composed. They just went tap, 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 and it was random and fine. But they really don't know what they did, why they did it, how they did it. They couldn't replicate it. I think there are building blocks, and I know this is my bias, that I believe they should know. But you have to build in that maybe it's curiosity.
Yeah. And that's what composing is really, I think. It is a curiosity, quite literally. I mean, it's a storytelling thing, but it's storytelling born out of curiosity, perhaps, is the idea.
Oh, I like that.
I mean, to throw a spanner in the works, I often when I discuss about this idea of what students should know, what young musicians should know, it's difficult, and it's fraught with offense. It can offend people, I guess, in a sense. And I provide Paul McCartney as an example of someone who is a genius, one of the greatest songwriters in the world, and he cannot read music, I believe. So it's tricky. But he would know so many things at the same time. It's not like he doesn't have building blocks. He definitely has building blocks. It's just, it might not necessarily have to be the one that this person uses as a tool to create what they create. And maybe it even goes to the sense that I was talking about putting on different hats, and even you collaborating with Paul Jams on the piano parts and that kind of thing. Like you have techniques, and you have a thing that you can do really, really well. But even though that might mean that your piano writing might not be as great as someone else's, it doesn't mean that you can't do it, and it doesn't mean that you don't understand enough about it a bit. You might kind of go to this again goes to collaborating. Someone has picked up and just knows, for example, in film music, synthesizers. Like it's a big part of a lot of film music. People like to use synthesizers. It's a whole different world to orchestras or choirs. And I love them and I play around with them. But when I really want to get stuck into them, I go to my friends who have basements like full to the brim with synthesizers, and I have no idea. They start rambling on about microphones as well, by the way, but also like models of synthesizers and technology, and it just goes over my head, and I'm like, no idea. But that's someone who took the time to learn those building blocks, and they know sine waves, and they know square tooth waves, and they know low frequency oscillators and blah, 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 right? And I know a little bit about it, I guess, but it didn't really interest me. I think it's great that I know that little bit about it, some little things, know a little bit, but I kind of defer to the experts, because if it doesn't interest me, well, that's fine. I mean, what interests me was singing and learning tessituras of voices and passagios, and learning all the instruments of the orchestra and beautiful different voices and all the ranges of the instruments. I got into that. And so they come to me when they want Mr. Orchestra kind of thing. So maybe that's the example. Like as long as you just kind of have your area of speciality and you know a little bit about lots of different things, so that you can communicate and make more collaboration and make more things that are bigger than the sum of its parts, as we've sort of said a couple of times. That's my thought on all that.
That is a great thought. This has been the most fascinating conversation, Joe.
Likewise.
I've loved it. I'm hoping, of course, that my listeners will, but I'm sure they will. You're fascinating.
Thank you.
So, and I will keep in contact, I promise. Before we go, you do get to just get on your soapbox and send one important message to the world.
Oh, wow. I feel like have I said them all already?
Well, I'm not saying we have been a little bit on soapboxes for the whole episode, because let's face it, we should be,
Yeah, we should be.
We should be. But is there just something else, a little final piece? I think we've got some quotable quotes out of this episode. Oh, my heavens. It's been amazing.
Another, like not necessarily a nugget, but like a message to the world.
Yes.
I mean, just to be really cheesy in a sense. I believe this is very cheesy, but I love cheesy.
Oh, me too. Come on.
Yeah, me too. Well, that reminds me of something else. If you want me to go on one little tangent, is that I love that more and more composers are writing romantic and emotional music these days. More and more. I mean, people always have. It's not like they ever stopped, but I'm just love that people are unashamedly doing that. But that's another story. It's a little bit sort of going into like art music and style and what have you. Anyway, my message to the world is that singing is an act of love. A communal act of love, and we should just keep doing more of it. How's that?
That is absolutely amazing. And on that,
I feel embarrassed, but
no, don't be embarrassed. It is just, you're going to make me cry. This is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
And
it's true, though. I mean, I stand by it. It's important in a really crazy world that we live in. that we just keep singing, and it's a communal act of love. I think so, and we need more and more of it these days.
Oh, I love it. And thank you so much for joining me, Joe.
Oh, thank you, Deb. My pleasure.
As we know, laughter relieves stress. Don't lose sight of the funny side of life. I asked my friend what date her birthday was. She said March 1st. So I walked around the room and asked her again. Thank you so much for watching our Crescendo Music Education podcast. For more information about all things Crescendo, including membership and music education resources, visit us at crescendo.com.au. Don't forget to like and subscribe